Hi, I'm Dr. Mel, and this is Dr. Mel's Message. I have a wonderful, incredible author to introduce you today. His name is Carl E. Moyler, and his book is called On Freedom and Revolt, a Comparative Investigation. Now, I'm not going to give it all away up front, but inside is remarkable. And we're going to speak to him now and find out about what this book is. Welcome. How are you, Carl?
I'm just fine. How are you doing, Dr. Mel?
I am doing fabulous. I tell you what, I am so excited to finally get to speak to with you over the phone. We had some technical issues up front, but you know what? We both held on, and now we're going to have a fabulous interview. So let's start first with what the book is about. We know the book is called On Freedom and Revolt, a Comparative Investigation. Now, we also have some best-selling Nobel Prize winners on the cover. And tell me a little bit about how does all of this tie in?
Well, it came in due to my long affinity with Albert Camus. The two writers that are in the book that I compare, the comparison is between Martin Luther King and Albert Camus. Martin Luther King, of course, he's American, and Albert Camus is French. And the book is basically a civil rights book. That's what I refer to it, because it's got so many things in there that deal with oppression and freedom and racism and war and inequality and that sort of thing.
Now, how did you come up with this idea, and why did you want to write this book?
Well, I wanted to write it because of some things that have been going on in America and going on in America for a long time. For an example, the issue of Afro-Americans' heritage in America. Afro-Americans came to the United States in 1619. And I'm one of them, and we are still fighting for equality and justice and fair play. And here it is in 2021.
Yes. Now, do you mind revealing your age?
Would I mind doing what?
Telling me your age.
Okay, my age this coming Sunday.
Okay.
The 14th of March. I will be 89 years old. So I'm not a young snapper. I'm not a young snapper anymore. I've been here for a long time. And all
but that
things,
also gives you credibility, like what we call street cred.
Absolutely. I've lived through it and I've survived. Okay, so yeah,
wow. Well, let's jump back a little bit, okay?
Yes.
I'm 63, and on March the 27th.
You're a young chick.
I'm a young baby now, let me tell you. So in the 1960s, I grew up being aged 2 through 10. So you were in your 40s at that time, is that correct?
That's right.
Wow. Tell me what it was like.
1950, in the 50s, I was just in my 20s. Let's see, 50s, 54. Yeah, I hadn't even reached the 20s yet. But I graduated from high school at 17, and then I went on to college. And my early 20s was was when I was away in college studying to be a teacher of foreign languages. Yes.
Incredible. Now, did you experience? I'm going to ask you some difficult, hard questions. You're black. I am white, which is great for this conversation because there are things that, as a white female, 60, okay, that I probably don't even understand. And I would consider myself very educated. And I was raised by my parents never to look at a person's skin color and judge them by that. Judge their heart, judge their actions, judge what they say, and decide if you like them or not, okay? So
yes.
I think because of that, I was blinded in a lot of ways to what was really going on around me. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed.
All right, so I don't mind admitting that, and I think the more that all people, I don't care what race, open up and just really have an honest talk with each other without getting upset or cancel me movement and all this other stuff that's going on, we're not going to get anywhere until we're honest with ourselves and we're honest with each other.
That's right.
So I love this. So tell me a little bit, what was racism like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s? And then we're going to jump to present day. Okay? So let's start with racism in the 50s.
Okay, in the late 40s, even in all through the 50s, and for the most part of the 1960s, racism was very much alive, and everything was to be separate. In other words, the two races, Afro-Americans and Caucasians, were kept absolutely separate, with Caucasians being the race who, according to history, knew it all, and the Afro-Americans being the people who knew very little. So there was gross inequality at that time.
Okay.
And that inequality has gone on from the time we came over here as slaves from Africa, but in chains, and also up until the present moment, we're still fighting for equality.
Yes.
And for freedom, and for the same opportunities that everybody else who comes to the United States from around the world, alien people, okay, they get a chance, in many cases, quicker than we do. So that is why, and it's not a vicious protest. It's something, hey, look, we've been here all these years. We've done many good things for America. We are American. Why treat us as second-class people, or walk away from us, or separate us from everybody else? So we're still fighting to close the gap and to come about what is known as brotherhood.
Okay,
so
let me ask you this. In the 40s and the 50s, you were in a totally segregated school. Is that correct?
Absolutely. My high school was
the blacks
totally
were not allowed to go to school with the whites, right?
That's right. There's no mixing or no mending or no coming together. We had black communities, we had black banks, we had black churches and everything, and a lot of it, of course, still exists.
Is that by choice or by society's so not accepted norms, but what society has done?
Well, it's by what is known as systemic segregation. Blacks used to stay over there. Blacks and whites who stay over there. When I was a kid growing up, we had restaurants. You couldn't even go into a restaurant. If you went to the restaurant, you had to go to the back door to get in the service, and then it would be stand up, passing out to you service. You couldn't come in to sit down. Okay, that's just one example. We had black movies, and they had a couple of black banks in Newport News, Virginia. That's where I came up as a kid. Okay,
wow.
So, and our schools and everything. My school was all black. And even my university, when I went there, West Virginia State University, when I went there in 1950, not a white student on the campus. We had a couple of white teachers, but they were all German Jews who had come to the United States to escape Nazism and to escape being sent to concentration camps. And, yes, I remember one name, the man that taught me German, the name was Friedrich Lehner. He was a German from Austria. But he was an excellent teacher of his own language, of course. Being from Austria, he taught German. Yes. So everything was separated, Dr. Mel. Okay, and my dad, for an example, when he had 4 sons, and he lectured all of us at being black youngsters how to survive being a black man in America. And we were right next to Newport News. You know, Newport News is there on Chesapeake Bay. But the white students had their schools and the black students had their schools. And we didn't come together for anything. There were black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. In particular neighborhood that I lived in, North Newport News, we call it. Not a single white person lived there during the whole time that I grew up. When I came in contact with any white kids, it was when I worked as a delivery boy at a local drugstore. We had to deliver prescriptions and other things that customers call in there with, okay? But as far as coming together, living together, doing things together, participating in things together was non-existent. And that was the same way it was at the time. I know throughout the South, in many other areas, east and west in the United States also. And I say again, that is what we're trying to take care of at the time, and that is exactly what Camus and Martin Luther King were dealing with. In America, yes, everything was separated, and even sometimes it was gross and mean segregation. If you stepped over the line, you got put in jail, and too many times you were killed even. Okay.
Wow.
Yes. So it was tough, and it was rough growing up. And then what happened as a result of that, it caused many black people to accept what white people thought of them, and they never tried to achieve what they were good at, because they looked at the segregation and it threw them off track of what their mission was, they felt, and what they wanted to do with their lives as far as their time, their skills, their talents, and their abilities. They just went into nothing. And that, in many cases, that's still the agenda. I've heard so many. Well, I just talked with my nephew some time ago, and he was telling me, "Oh, Carl, I get tired of running into situations where the color of my skin, you hear me, Uncle Carl, the color of my skin disciplines me to not to apply and try to apply what I'm good at. So I'm taking this second class citizen position, which is nowhere near of what I feel I can be able to do."
Wow. All right, so let's move into the 60s, and let's talk a little bit about Martin Luther King.
Okay.
How did y'all view him, and when he came to the forefront for civil rights?
Okay, well, Martin Luther King was an educated black man. He went to a seminary. He got skipped over in high school as far as the 9th grade and the 12th grade are concerned. He was a brilliant person, okay, and he went on to the seminary and did his education up north, Crow's Seminary first of all, and then he married his wife, who was also from the South, and they decided that they would come back to the South to help their companions fight the battle of discrimination. So Martin Luther King was a young man, a brilliant young man, a great preacher, and a great writer. He was not a professional writer, but he was an excellent writer with his writing skills as well as his rich vocabulary in preaching. He ended up being placed in the leadership role of the protest going on when it started in the 50s, okay?
Okay.
And we all aspired to him. We admired him for what he did, because that took nerve to do that. You were running the risk of your life when you spoke up in the South as far as discrimination and segregation is concerned. And, of course, he was finally assassinated.
Right.
But the books that he wrote were telltale of what he stood for and what he was trying to get to happen for his race, being a Southerner himself and now being an educated and minister Southerner. He wanted to do everything he could. So he did it without reluctance, and he did it on the basis of feeling that was God's call for him, to be a standout person for the equality of Afro-Americans in the South and throughout America.
All right. Now we're going to move a little bit to the 70s, and this is where I guess I myself start coming in as a younger person, okay? Mm-hmm. I remember when we integrated the schools, and I was in the 7th grade, and my sister was in the 8th grade, and they called for mandatory integration. And my sister and I didn't have any problem with it, but the first day there was rumors that at lunch there was going to be a huge riot between the blacks and the whites and you name it, okay?
Okay. Now, what city were you in at the time?
I was in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
And we decided, as my sister, we rode our bikes to school. We decided that we didn't want to be a part of that because we thought it was nonsense. We didn't mind the blacks coming in. We didn't mind. So we left school. It's called skipping school. And the huge fight broke out. I mean, it did break out.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Everyone that stayed, everyone that stayed and participated in the fight weren't expelled. But my sister and I were expelled for skipping school that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the 7th grade, and it infuriated my parents because they were like, they had to go to the school board and everything. You know, we were straight A students, 4.0s, no behavior problems,
okay.
et cetera. And my mother and my father were infuriated and said, we didn't raise our girls to accept your racism. They had every right, if they felt they were in danger, to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first really awakening as a child that racism existed, because I wasn't raised to look at it that way.
Okay.
And then I was hit with this big riot, and I'm like, whoa, what is going on? Okay, so that was in the 70s when I was in junior high. And then when I got to high school, 9th grade, my tennis partner, probably shouldn't say his full name, but Harold, my tennis partner, was a black guy, okay?
Okay.
We played doubles tennis, mixed race, and that's when I really knew racism existed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, I was almost blackballed, you know what I mean? Because, how dare you play tennis with them? And, I mean, we won. We were good, okay? And we played for 4 years together.
That is an example of what black kids could not get. Now, that was an exception to the case, okay? Are you playing with a black kid even, that was in the 70s, you said?
Yes, Arthur Ashe, though, it was already onto the picture.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I grew up, and with that, looking at that, and still never really understood it, until I literally got into college. And that's when my eyes opened that people weren't raised the way I was raised to think. And when I say people, I'm going to say white people. I'm just going to call us on the carpet, okay? And that's there was racism there. And you're right. Now we can jump to right now, 2021. Much has not changed.
That's right.
I mean, as a white woman, I can see this. It has not changed. And it became very evident when my middle daughter married a black man. And by the way, all of my son-in-laws but one are biracial marriages.
Okay.
Yeah. And when he came over, and he'd bring me something, and he goes, well, I better get out of the neighborhood. And I said, what are you talking about? Here I go again.
Okay.
And he says, right. He goes, your husband's out of town, and you're sick, but I'm bringing you some soup, and I don't need to be seen in your neighborhood after dark because I'll probably get pulled over. And I said, what are you talking about?
That is right. That would happen to you. Yes.
I said, what are you talking about? I said, this is, no. He goes, and he just says, Mel, you don't really get it. He says, you're totally accepting of this. He says, but not everybody is today.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my little granddaughter, biracial baby, and her hair is kinky black, okay?
Right. Yes.
And she's a beautiful child, let me tell you. I love it, But when we would take her out, we'd get strange looks.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I mean, and I'm like, I don't get it, people. I don't get it. How are we going to get over this? I mean, really, how are people going to get over this systemic racism? I mean, that's a point-blank question.
Well, now, that was one thing that Martin Luther King and Albert Camus stood staunch as a big monument on against racism. In the case of Camus, when the French came to Algeria around 1830, they did everything to the Algerians that the white race did to black-skinned people here in the United States. So when the two men stretched out what they believed in, it came into contact or came under stress and strain from the French who were in Algeria. They took everything away from the Arabs. They took their property, they took their land. The Arabs couldn't run for office, they couldn't vote, they couldn't do anything. Okay, so Camus saw that and he raised up against it. Okay, he was a battler. Martin Luther King, the same thing happened to him. What he saw here in the United States. Afro-Americans are discriminated against on every poll, in every opportunity, in every job, in everything. You know, white people would make, let's say, $5 to $10 an hour for the same work. Afro-Americans were making $3 or $4 an hour, and they were expected to perform the same way and do just as well as white people did. And everything that they did or everything that they're trying to do, in many occupations they were not even considered, even though they were top of the line. Take President Obama, for an example. A man from Harvard University, graduated, the president of his senior class, an outstanding student, top of the line student. But when he became president, what happened? The Southerners even came up with a new political name, the Tea Party, expressly for the purpose of keeping so-called Obama in his place. He's president now, and they still gonna keep him in his place.
Right. That's one of the most powerful men in the world, right?
Yeah. And how can you be any better than a president, an Afro-American president at that, who was elected by the American people now to be president of the United States? But still, he'd had one H of a time in being president against those people who were against him. And I'll say it again, especially members of the Republican Party. And look at what they're doing right now. They're doing the same thing, the Republicans. Now, I don't know whether you're a Democrat or Republican, Mel, but
I'm neither nor. I vote for the person I want, not the party. Okay,
that's good.
Neither.
Right now, after Mr. Trump, what Biden is trying to do now is just 100% opposed to the platform of things that Trump tried to put into operation when he was president.
Right.
And he's getting the H whipped out of him because the Republicans are still great admirers. And one thing that I can't understand, as inhuman, and I look at Mr. Trump as an inhuman person, and I start with how he treated the people from Mexico, how he treated the people from South America and from other areas in the United States. He treated them like dogs, put them in the equivalent of concentration camps, housing is what I would call it. And the Republicans that he had going along with him didn't find any fault. And right now, the riot that was held in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, supporting a man who did so much, I would say, so much harm to the psyche and to the visions of people trying to go somewhere, especially Afro-Americans whose skin is colored, what they were trying to do. He was not a good president. But anyway, that's part of the agenda of how it goes from one end of our civilization here in the United States to another. It starts from the White House and it can go through the Senate, through the House of Representatives, all the way down to the man who's running a restaurant.
Well, let me ask you this.
We're discriminated against 100%. Okay, so
let me ask you, what do you hope people get from reading your book on Freedom and Revolt, A Comparative Investigation?
Okay, what they would get was the message, the main outline and message of the book. The book is designed around the issue of equal rights, around the issue of civil rights. It's there. Mm-hmm. And trying to get people to read the book and to look at what we have lost as a result of holding on to segregation all these years from 1619 until right now. We're looking at about 400 years of discrimination against Afro-Americans.
That's a lot of
we're
forgiveness
hoping that
to do, isn't it?
What I was hoping that the book would involve would be readers of the book to evaluate themselves in terms of what these two men were saying with their comparative writings in the book. They're on chapter 5, for an example. I came up with, after reading their books, after reading the 12 books of Albert Camus and the 5 books of Martin Luther King. These guys are trying to write, to give direction, to give a message to the world, especially to the United States, of the systemic discrimination and how it has hurt people, not only the oppressed, but also the oppressor, because you can't be a good-thinking person and discriminate against another person who's got an arm, eyes, ears, nose, feet, and everything else just like you. It's an inhumane thing to do. We are all created by the Creator, whose name is God, and we were all created with the same things. So how can I be less than you just by the color of my skin?
I agree with that 100%.
Yes.
I mean, it's really, when you sit down, and like I said, I'm a baby compared to you. I mean, you're 90 years old, and I have a very dear place in my heart for children and the elderly. It's like, you're not going to abuse, number one, either of them. But when you throw in racism, like I said, for my granddaughter, who is 5, and you are 90, I don't want her to have to live that life.
Right.
I mean, I don't, as a grandmother, as a human, And when I have the opportunity, like speaking with someone like you, a professor, and for goodness sake, very well educated, 90 years old with a wealth of experience, it gives me chills. And I think we could probably talk for 12 hours and never get to the bottom of any of these issues if we just, started taking, literally decades at a time. And what have you learned from all this? And so my final question to you, as a 90-year-old black male, what advice do you have for all of us, not blacks, not whites, not Asians, us, humanity? What would that be for us?
Okay, what we all should look at, number one, is that we're all human beings, and we should treat one another as human beings and go by what Camus said. I gave a quote that he made, that the main job of an author, a writer, should be to keep civilization from destroying itself.
Wow.
And in the case of Dr. Martin Luther King, he aspired to see America one of these days, before his assassination. And some people are living on to carry it out now with the protests and everything, that we learn how to live as Americans. If we were born here in America, we are Americans. We're not some other race. Black people have been very faithful to the United States. We have not abandoned what we see here and have not abandoned what we have done here in spite of the discrimination. Okay? And so Martin Luther King said we have to come together as human beings, and develop what is known as the beloved community. That is living with one another, respecting one another, and treating one another with equality and with respect. This is something that has never been given to the Afro-American community. Respect.
Wow.
And
yes, those words ring so true right now as we go forward, coming out of a pandemic, when we all can really join together. It's about time that we really join together.
That's right.
I mean, does that make sense to you? because we've got a long way to go, Carl.
Yes.
Society has a long way to go, but you know what? We can do it if
absolutely.
each of us, if we make up our minds to do it.
Yeah, and this is what Camus and both Martin Luther King said. We have to work together. It can't be done. We have to work together. We have to stop working as two separate bodies, two different nations within a nation, okay? And working together. And this is what he said in one of his writings. The writing was The Plague, Plague.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that was a writing that he wrote about what was happening in Algeria. People have to come together, a doctor, a lawyer, a school teacher, an engineer, and a military man. We've got to come together as a group and finally commit ourselves to the truth that God created us all, and we need to stop acting as two separate human creations. The only thing that he didn't create was the color of our skin, okay? But everything else, why should we be treated any less than human beings? We deserve to be treated as fellow humans, looking at the time that we were brought here in 1619 and looking at where we are now 400 years later, and the freedom of mind on the part of white people, many of them, is still injurious. Okay, and the freedom of black people as far as the color of their skin, they're saying, well, white folks say I'm second class, so I'll drop back and not do what I'm capable of doing, and not do what the good Lord has given me the skills and the blessings and the grace to be. I'll just be that second-class citizen. And a lot of people have taken themselves, and this is still happening. Black people take themselves out of the battle because what they say, oh, white folk ain't going to let me do that anyway. They're still crazy.
Wow. So we're all hurting ourselves in the long run.
Yes.
We really are. Again, I am speaking with author Carl Moyler, and he has written the book On Freedom and Revolt, A Comparative Investigation. I believe that everyone above age 18 should be reading this book and look at how it can impact our lives and the world as humanity grows and goes forward. The book is available on Amazon and paperback and hardback. And again, I highly recommend this book. And I also wanted to do a little shout out to Strat Advertising for bringing Carl to my blog, because I think this is a topic that is needed to be talked about and in a very open and honest way like Carl and I have done today. I challenge every one of my audience members right now to get this book, On Freedom and Revolt, A Comparative Investigation. Read it. Send me an email what you think about it. And also, while you're there, leave a review for Carl. Again, I'm Dr. Mel, and this is Dr. Mel's Message. Thank you, Carl. It's a wonderful interview.
And I thank you, Dr. Mel. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye, and God bless.
God bless you, too.
Thank you.